The old truck's engine coughed and wheezed as it climbed the winding mountain road. Maya gripped the steering wheel tighter, her knuckles white against the cracked plastic. Every mile took her further from the life she'd known and closer to something that felt like freedom, even though she wasn't sure what that looked like anymore. The gas station attendant back in town had given her directions to the Henderson ranch with a curious look in his eyes. People didn't usually come looking for work this far up in the mountains, especially not women traveling alone with nothing but a worn duffel bag and determination in their eyes. Maya touched the concealer on her cheek gently, making sure it still covered the yellow-green bruise that was finally starting to fade. 3 weeks had passed since she'd made the decision to leave, and she was still checking over her shoulder, still jumping at unexpected sounds, still waiting for him to find her. The ranch appeared around the next bend like something from a postcard. Rolling green pastures stretched out under the Montana sky, dotted with cattle that looked like toys from this distance. A weathered barn stood next to a 2-story farmhouse with a wraparound porch that had seen better days, but still looked welcoming. Split-rail fences crisscrossed the property, and mountains rose up in the background like protective walls. Maya parked the truck near the house and sat for a moment, gathering her courage. She'd called ahead, speaking to a woman named Ruth Henderson, who'd sounded kind but tired over the phone. The job posting she'd found online was simple: housekeeper wanted, room and board included, references not required. That last part had been what caught her attention. Most people wanted to know about your past, wanted explanations for gaps in employment, wanted to understand why a woman in her late 20s was starting over with nothing. The screen door opened, before Maya could even knock. Ruth Henderson looked exactly like she'd sounded on the phone, somewhere in her 70s, with silver hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes that seemed to see more than they let on. She wore jeans and a flannel shirt that had been washed so many times it was soft as butter. "You must be Maya," Ruth said, stepping onto the porch. "I'm Ruth. How was the drive up?" "Long but pretty," Maya replied, surprised by how normal her voice sounded. She'd practiced this conversation in her head dozens of times during the drive, but Ruth's easy manner made the rehearsed words unnecessary. Ruth nodded toward the mountains. "Wait until you see the sunrise from here. Coffee's better than any. Alarm clock." She studied Maya's face for a moment, and Maya fought the urge to turn away. "You look tired. When did you eat last?" The question caught Maya off guard. When had she eaten? She'd grabbed a candy bar at the gas station, but before that, she couldn't remember. Keeping track of meals had become difficult when your stomach was always tied up in knots. "I'm fine," Maya said automatically, the response that had become second nature over the past few years. Ruth raised an eyebrow. "That wasn't what I asked. Come on inside, we'll get you fed and then I'll show you around." The inside of the house smelled like wood polish and something that might have been apple pie. The furniture was old but well cared for, the kind of pieces that told stories about the families who'd lived with them. Photographs covered every available surface. Ranch hands, cattle drives, what looked like several generations of the Henderson family. "Sit," Ruth said, pointing to a chair at the kitchen table. "I made too much soup anyway." Maya wanted to protest, to say she wasn't hungry, to maintain the independence she'd fought so hard to claim. But the smell of the soup made her stomach growl loudly enough that Ruth smiled, and Maya found herself sinking into the chair. The soup was the best thing she'd tasted in months: real chicken, vegetables that still had some bite to them, broth that tasted like it had been simmering all day. Maya tried to eat slowly, to maintain some dignity, but she was hungrier than she'd realized. "My husband built this place back in 1952, Ruth said, settling into the chair across from Maya with her own bowl. "We raised 3 kids here, ran cattle for 40 years. Lost him 2 winters ago." "I'm sorry," Maya said, meaning it. "He lived a good life. Can't ask for much more than that." Ruth's eyes went distant for a moment, then focused back on Maya. "Property's too much for me to handle alone now. My kids live in California, got their own lives. They keep telling me to sell, move somewhere easier, but this place..." She gestured around the kitchen. "It's got good bones. Just needs someone to help take care of it." Maya nodded, understanding more than Ruth probably realized. Sometimes a place could be the only thing standing between you and complete collapse. The job's pretty straightforward, Ruth continued. Keep the house clean, help with meals, maybe some light bookkeeping. Nothing too complicated. Pays not much, but you'd have your own place, and there's a cabin about a quarter-mile up the road that comes with the job. It's small, but it's private. Privacy. Maya hadn't had real privacy in years. The idea of a space that was completely her own, where she could lock the door and know she was safe, was almost too good to believe. I'd like to see it, Maya said. Ruth smiled. Figured you might. We can walk over after you finish eating. The cabin sat in a grove of pine trees connected to the main house by a dirt path that wound through the pasture. It was small, just one room with a kitchenette, a bathroom, and a stone fireplace, but it was perfect. Windows on 3 sides let in the afternoon light, and the porch had a view of the mountains that took Maya's breath away. Previous housekeeper lived here for 15 years, Ruth said, opening the windows to let in fresh air. She moved to town last month to be closer to her grandkids, left most of the furniture, said it belonged with the cabin. Maya walked through the space slowly, touching the simple wooden table, the bookshelf filled with paperbacks, the quilt folded at the foot of the bed. Everything was clean and comfortable and peaceful in a way that felt foreign after so many years of walking on eggshells. There's a generator for power outages, and the well water's the best you'll taste anywhere, Ruth continued. Nearest neighbor, besides me, is about 5 miles down the mountain, so it's quiet up here. That a problem for you? Maya shook her head. Quiet sounded like heaven. Good. Oh, and fair warning, my foreman comes by the main house most mornings around 6. Name's Cole. He's been with me for about 8 years now. Good man, keeps to himself mostly. Just didn't want you to be startled if you see him around. Something in Maya's expression must have changed because Ruth's voice gentled. He's harmless, dear. Wouldn't hurt a fly. But if you're more comfortable, I can ask him to come by later in the day when you're settled in. No, it's fine, Maya said quickly, not wanting to seem difficult. She needed this job, needed this place, needed the chance to disappear into the mountains and figure out who she was when she wasn't afraid. They walked back to the main house as the sun started to set behind the peaks. Ruth showed her the cleaning supplies, the way the old washing machine liked to be coaxed into working, the pantry stocked with enough food to feed a small army. I get up early, Ruth said as they finished the tour. Coffee's usually ready by 5:30 if you want some, but there's no rush on anything else. We'll figure out a routine that works for both of us. Maya nodded, still hardly believing this was real. When do you want me to start? How about tomorrow? Give you tonight to get settled. Ruth handed her a set of keys. One for the cabin, one for the main house. Oh, and Maya? The past is the past up here. Whatever brought you to us doesn't matter as much as what you do going forward. The words hit Maya harder than she'd expected. She blinked back sudden tears and managed to nod. That night, Maya sat on the cabin's porch listening to sounds she'd forgotten existed. Wind through the pine trees. An owl calling from somewhere in the darkness. The distant lowing of cattle. No sirens, no shouting, no doors slamming. Just peace. She made herself a cup of tea with the kettle she'd found in the kitchenette and pulled the quilt around her shoulders. For the first time in years, she didn't check the locks twice before settling in for the night. For the first time in years, she fell asleep without jumping at every sound. The next morning, Maya woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and the sound of birds she couldn't identify. She'd slept deeper than she had in months, and for a few blissful seconds, she forgot where she was. Then memory returned, not the bad memories that usually came first, but the good one from yesterday. Ruth's kindness, the peaceful cabin, the chance to start over. She dressed carefully in clothes that covered her arms, applied concealer to the fading bruises, and walked down to the main house. The smell of coffee and bacon guided her to the kitchen, where Ruth was standing at the stove. Morning, dear. Sleep well? Better than I have in a long time, Maya admitted. Good. Bacon and eggs? I always make too much. They were just sitting down to eat when Maya heard the sound of boots on the porch steps. Her body tensed automatically, the fork freezing halfway to her mouth. Ruth must have noticed because she reached over and patted Maya's hand gently. "That'll be Cole. Right on time as always." The screen door opened, and a man stepped into the kitchen. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that needed a haircut and eyes the color of the storm clouds that gathered over the mountains. He wore faded jeans, work boots, and a shirt with the sleeve omis. 3 weeks passed like pages turning in a book Maya had never read before. Each morning brought the same routine: wake to mountain silence, walk down to the main house for coffee with Ruth, spend the day in peaceful work that felt more like meditation than labor. And each morning Cole would appear at 6 o'clock sharp, hat in hand, ready to discuss the day's ranch work with Ruth. Maya had started to anticipate his arrival, though she couldn't quite explain why. Maybe it was because he was the only unpredictable element in her carefully structured new life, or maybe it was because of the way he moved through the world, quietly, deliberately, like someone who understood that sudden movements could startle more than just horses. She'd begun to notice things about him that she probably shouldn't have. The way he always knocked on the screen door even though Ruth had told him a dozen times to just come in. How he took his coffee black and never sat down during their morning meetings, as if he didn't want to impose. The careful way he spoke to Ruth with a respect that went deeper than just employer and employee. And she'd noticed how he acted around her, giving her plenty of space, keeping his voice level and calm, never asking personal questions or making the kind of comments that some men thought were friendly but felt like invasions. He treated her like she was made of something fragile, but not in a way that made her feel weak. More like he understood that some things needed extra care to heal properly. On a Tuesday morning that dawned crisp and clear, Maya was washing dishes when she heard Cole's truck pull up earlier than usual. Through the kitchen window, she watched him unload something from the truck bed, lumber it looked like, and what might have been roofing materials. Ruth appeared in the kitchen a few minutes later, already dressed for the day despite the early hour. "Morning, dear. Cole's here early to fix that loose board on your cabin's porch. Found it yesterday when he was checking the fence line near your place. Figured it was better to fix it before someone stepped through it and got hurt." Maya looked up from the dishes, surprise flickering across her face. "He doesn't need to do that, I can manage." "Course you could," Ruth said, pouring herself coffee. "But Cole's got the tools and the know-how, and it'll take him all of 20 minutes. Besides, that's what we do up here. Take care of each other." The concept was still foreign to Maya. In her old life, every favor had come with strings attached. Every kindness had carried an expectation of payment. She'd learned to be suspicious of help, to look for the catch, to brace herself for what would be demanded in return. "I should probably go tell him where the spare key is," Maya said, drying her hands on a dish towel. "Already gave it to him yesterday. Don't worry, he'll be done and gone before you even know he was there." But Maya found herself walking back, to the cabin anyway, drawn by curiosity and something else she couldn't name. She found Cole crouched on the porch, measuring the damaged board with careful precision. He'd spread his tools out neatly on a tarp, organized like a surgeon's instruments. "Morning," she said softly, not wanting to startle him. He looked up and touched the brim of his hat. "Morning. Sorry to bother you so early. Ruth said you wouldn't mind if I fixed this before it got worse." "You don't have to apologize. I appreciate it." Maya settled on the porch steps, far enough away to give him space to work but close enough to watch. "How bad is it?" "Not too bad. Looks like the wood just expanded and contracted over a few seasons until the nails worked loose. Happens sometimes with these old cabins." He pulled the damaged board free with gentle efficiency. "Should hold for another 20 years once I get it secured properly." Maya watched him work, fascinated by the methodical way he approached the task. Each movement was deliberate, practiced, economical. He didn't rush or force anything, just worked steadily until the job was done. "You been doing this kind of work long?" she asked. "Most of my life, I guess. My dad was a carpenter before." Cole paused, his hands stilling for a moment. "Before he passed, taught me young that if you're going to do something, you might as well do it right." There was something in his voice that made Maya look closer. A careful quality, like he was choosing his words with the same precision he used to measure wood. She recognized that carefulness, that way of editing yourself before speaking. It was what people did when they carried stories they weren't ready to tell. "That's good advice," she said. Cole nodded and went back to work. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. The only sounds the distant lowing of cattle and the rhythmic tap of Cole's hammer as he secured the new board. Maya found herself relaxing in a way that surprised her. Usually being alone with a man, even one who seemed as harmless as Cole, put her on edge. But something about him felt safe. Maybe it was the way he didn't try to fill the silence with unnecessary conversation, or how he'd positioned himself so she had a clear path to the cabin door if she wanted to leave. When he finished, Cole gathered his tools with the same careful efficiency he'd used throughout the job. "That should do it," he said, testing the board with his weight. "Solid as a rock now." "Thank you," Maya said, meaning it more than he probably realized. "What do I owe you?" Cole looked genuinely confused. "Owe me? Nothing. It's part of maintaining the property. But your time, the material—" "Maya." Her name sounded different when he said it, gentler somehow. "You don't owe me anything. This is just neighbors helping neighbors." The word neighbors hit her unexpectedly. When had she last lived somewhere where people looked out for each other without expecting something in return? When had she last been part of a community instead of just someone trying to survive? "Still," she said, "I'd like to do something to say thank you. Maybe I could make dinner sometime? For you and Ruth?" Cole paused in the act of closing his toolbox. "That's kind of you, but you don't need to do that." "I know I don't need to. I want to." Maya surprised herself with the firmness in her voice. "I'm a pretty good cook, actually. It's been a while since I've had anyone to cook for." Something shifted in Cole's expression, a softening around the edges that made him look younger. "Well, if you're sure. Ruth's always complaining that I live on coffee and whatever's easiest to heat up. I'm sure. How about Friday? Nothing fancy, just a regular meal." "I'd like that," Cole said, and Maya could tell he meant it. After he left, Maya stood on her newly repaired porch and tried to understand what had just happened. She'd initiated social contact with a man. She'd invited him for dinner. She'd done it without calculating the risks or bracing herself for disappointment. It felt strange and scary and somehow right all at the same time. The rest of the week passed with an anticipation Maya hadn't felt in years. She found herself planning the menu, thinking about what Cole might like, wondering if she still remembered how to cook for pleasure instead of just survival. Ruth noticed her increased energy and smiled knowingly but didn't comment. Friday afternoon, Maya drove down to the small town at the base of the mountain to shop for groceries. The general store was the kind of place that probably hadn't changed much in 50 years, with wooden floors that creaked and shelves stocked with everything from canned goods to fishing tackle. The elderly man behind the counter greeted her like he'd known her for years. "You must be Ruth's new helper," he said as she approached with her basket. "I'm Frank. Heard good things about you from folks who've been up to the ranch." Maya felt a flush of surprise. People had been talking about her, but apparently in a good way. In her old life, being talked about had always meant trouble. "Nice to meet you," she said. "Ruth's been wonderful to work for. She's good people. Lost her husband a couple years back. Real shame. That man could fix anything and would help anybody. Glad she's got someone looking after her now." Frank started ringing up her groceries, his movements unhurried. "You settling in okay up there? Takes some folks a while to get used to the quiet." "I like the quiet," Maya said honestly. "Good. Not everybody's cut out for mountain living. You cooking for a crowd tonight? This is a lot of food for 2 people. Maya felt her cheeks warm. "Just having Cole over for dinner, to thank him for fixing something at my cabin." Frank's face broke into a grin. "Well now, that boy could use a home-cooked meal. Works too hard and doesn't take care of himself near enough. You'll be doing him a real favor." As Maya drove back up the mountain, Frank's words stuck with her. Cole worked too hard, didn't take care of himself. She wondered what that meant. What drove someone to pour themselves into work until there was nothing left for personal needs? Back at the cabin, she spent the afternoon cooking with more care than she'd given food in months. pot roast with vegetables, fresh bread, apple pie made from fruit Ruth had canned the previous fall. Simple food, but made with attention and intention. Made with the desire to nourish rather than just fill. Cole arrived at 6:30 sharp, carrying a bouquet of wildflowers that looked like he'd picked them from the meadow behind the barn. He'd clearly made an effort. Clean jeans, a shirt she hadn't seen before, hair still damp from the shower. "These are beautiful," Maya said, taking the flowers. "Thank you." "Figured the cabin could use some color," Cole said, looking around the small space with appreciation. "Smells amazing in here." They ate by candlelight, partly because Maya thought it would be nice. 2 months had passed since Maya arrived at the Henderson Ranch, and she was beginning to believe that maybe she really could build a life here. The nightmares came less frequently now. She could hear unexpected noises without immediately dropping to the floor. She'd started keeping the cabin windows open at night, trusting in the peace of the mountains to keep her safe. Her friendship with Cole had grown quietly, built on shared morning coffees and easy conversations that never pushed too deep. He'd helped her plant a small garden behind the cabin, teaching her which vegetables grew best in mountain soil and how to tell when the last frost had really passed. She'd started cooking dinner for him and Ruth once a week, meals that had become the highlight of everyone's schedule. Ruth had begun to look at them both with knowing smiles that she tried to hide behind her coffee cup. Maya pretended not to notice, but she'd caught herself humming while she worked and realized that somewhere along the way, she'd started to feel something that might have been happiness. That's when her past came looking for her. It was a Thursday afternoon, unseasonably warm for late spring in the mountains. Maya was hanging laundry on the line behind the main house, enjoying the way the sheets snapped in the mountain breeze, when she heard a car engine struggling up the steep ranch road. Visitors were rare enough that she paused in her work, shading her eyes to see who might be coming. The car that appeared around the bend made her blood turn to ice. A red sedan with a dented front bumper and a crack across the windshield that she knew had been there for 3 years. Her hands began to shake so badly that she dropped the wet sheet she'd been holding. Derek. He'd found her. Maya's first instinct was to run, to disappear into the woods behind the cabin and hide until he gave up and left. But her legs felt like water, and besides, where could she go? This was the end of the road, literally. There was nowhere to run except deeper into wilderness she didn't know well enough to navigate. The car pulled up next to the house and sat there for a moment, engine ticking as it cooled. Maya could see Derek through the windshield, his familiar silhouette hunched over the steering wheel. Even from a distance, she could tell he'd been drinking. She knew the set of his shoulders, the way he held his head when alcohol had sharpened his anger into something dangerous. Finally, he got out of the car. 3 months away from him had given Maya perspective she hadn't possessed before. He looked smaller than she remembered, less imposing. His clothes were wrinkled and stained, his hair greasy and unkempt. But the anger radiating from him was the same as ever, hot and unpredictable and looking for a target. "Well, well," Derek called out, his voice carrying the exaggerated precision of someone trying to hide how drunk they were. "Look what I found hiding in the middle of nowhere." Maya forced herself to stand straight, to not immediately apologize or cower. "Derek, how did you find me? You think you're smart, running off like that, leaving me to figure out where my wife went?" He started walking toward her, and Maya automatically stepped back. "Took some doing, but I've got friends who know how to find people. Turns out you're not as clever as you think." The word wife hit Maya like a physical blow. Legally, she supposed it was still true. She'd filed papers, but the divorce wasn't final yet. In Derek's mind, she was still his property, still something he owned and could reclaim whenever he chose. "We're getting divorced, Derek. I sent you the papers." "Divorce?" Derek laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "You think you can just walk away from me? From our marriage? You think some piece of paper changes anything?" He was closer now, close enough that Maya could smell the alcohol on his breath, see the red rim around his eyes that meant he'd been drinking for hours, maybe days, close enough that her body began to prepare for pain. "You're going to get in that car with me," Derek continued, his voice dropping to the tone that Maya knew meant serious trouble. We're going home and you're going to stop this foolishness. I've been patient with you, but my patience is done. I'm not going anywhere with you. The words came out stronger than Maya felt, surprised to hear her own voice holding steady. Derek's face darkened. The hell you're not. You're my wife. You belong to me. And if you think hiding out here in the middle of nowhere is going to change that, you're more stupid than I thought. Maya. The voice came from behind Derek, calm and controlled but carrying an undertone that made Derek spin around. Cole stood, about 20 feet away, having approached from the direction of the barn. He was holding a coil of rope in his hands as if he'd been in the middle of ranch work when he'd heard voices. "Everything okay out here?" Cole asked, his eyes moving between Maya and Derek with careful assessment. Derek looked Cole up and down, taking in the work clothes, the quiet confidence, the way Cole positioned himself so that he was between Derek and Maya without making it obvious. "This is none of your business, Cowboy. This is between me and my wife." "If it's happening on this property, it's my business," Cole replied evenly. "I'm the foreman here." Maya could see Derek calculating, trying to figure out if Cole was a threat he needed to worry about. Derek had always been good at reading people, at knowing who he could intimidate and who he needed to be careful around. "Look, we don't want any trouble," Derek said, switching tactics and putting on the charming smile that had fooled Maya for so long. "My wife and I just had a misunderstanding. We're working it out. We'll be out of your hair in a few minutes." "That true, Maya?" Cole asked, and there was something in the way he said her name that gave her strength. "No," she said quietly. "It's not true." Derek's facade cracked instantly. "Maya, don't make this harder than it has to be. You know what happens when you make things difficult." The threat hung in the air like smoke, and Maya felt herself shrinking back into old patterns. Years of conditioning kicked in, the voice in her head that said it was easier to just go along, to avoid making him angrier, to do whatever it took to minimize the damage. "If you need to hit me, do it," she whispered, the words torn from some deep place of learned helplessness. "Just get it over with." The silence that followed was complete. Even the wind seemed to stop. Maya kept her eyes closed, waiting for the familiar sharp pain, for the explosion of Derek's fist against her face or ribs or wherever he decided she needed to be taught a lesson. But instead of Derek's voice, she heard Cole speaking, his words quiet but carrying absolute authority. "All I'll ever do is hold you if you'll let me, but only when you're ready and only if you want me to." Maya's eyes flew open. Derek had raised his hand, was in the middle of the backswing that would have ended with her on the ground, but Cole had moved between them, not touching Derek but standing close enough that Derek would have to go through him to reach Maya. "Now, I suggest you get back in your car and leave," Cole continued, his voice still conversational but something steel-hard underneath it. "And I suggest you don't come back." "You can't tell me what to do," Derek snarled. "She's my wife, this is my business." "Was your wife, maybe. Isn't anymore. And this is private property, which makes it my business." Cole shifted slightly, and Maya noticed that somehow he'd managed to position himself so that Derek's back was to the car, cutting off his easiest escape route. "You've got about 30 seconds to decide whether you want to leave under your own power, or whether I need to call the sheriff." Derek looked between Cole and Maya, his face cycling through anger, frustration, and something that might have been calculation. Finally, he focused on Maya. "This isn't over," he said. "You think you can hide from me forever? You think your cowboy friend here is going to protect you? I know where you are now. I can come back anytime." "Derek." Cole's voice cut through the threat like a blade. "Leave. Now." Maybe it was something in Cole's tone, or maybe Derek realized he was outnumbered on unfamiliar ground. But he finally backed down. He stormed to his car, yanking the door open hard enough that Maya flinched. "This isn't over, Maya," he called through the open window as he started the engine. "You belong to me. You always will." The car disappeared down the mountain road in a cloud of dust and gravel, leaving Maya and Cole standing in the sudden quiet. Maya realized she was shaking, her whole body trembling like a leaf in a storm. The adrenaline that had kept her upright during the confrontation was fading, leaving behind a weakness that made her legs unsteady. Without warning, her knees buckled. Cole caught her before she could hit the ground, his arms coming around her, with infinite gentleness. And then the tears came, great gasping sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her chest. "I'm sorry," she managed between sobs. "I'm so sorry. I never wanted to bring this here. I never wanted him to find me." "Shh," Cole murmured, and Maya realized he was holding her, really holding her, for the first time. His arms were strong and steady and completely unthreatening. "You don't have anything to apologize for. None of this is your fault." He said I belonged to him. Maya whispered against Cole's shirt. "For so long I believed that. I thought that was just how marriage worked. That's not marriage. That's not love. That's ownership, and you're not property to be owned." Cole's voice was fierce with conviction. "You belong to yourself, Maya. Only yourself." They stood there in the afternoon sun, Maya crying out years of fear and shame. Why? The weeks following Derek's visit brought changes that Maya could feel as much as see. The easy peace she'd found at the ranch had been disrupted, replaced by a constant alertness that exhausted her even when she was sitting still. She jumped at car engines in the distance, froze when the wind slammed a door, checked the locks on her cabin multiple times each night. But something else had changed too. Cole's presence had become a steady constant in her daily life, not hovering or intrusive, but reliably there. He'd taken to checking on her more frequently, appearing at random times throughout the day with excuses about fence repairs or cattle counts that needed attention near her cabin. Maya knew what he was really doing, and she was grateful for it even when her independent streak bristled at needing protection. Ruth, with her practical wisdom, had suggested that Maya might benefit from talking to someone professional about what she'd been through. "Sometimes," Ruth had said gently, "we need help sorting through things that are too big to handle alone." That's how Maya found herself driving down the mountain twice a week, Cole beside her in his pickup truck, to see Dr. Patricia Williams in the county seat. Dr. Williams was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a matter-of-fact way of speaking. That made Maya feel like her experiences weren't unusual or shameful, just difficult situations that required practical solutions. The first session had been terrifying. Maya sat in the comfortable office with its soft lighting and houseplants, trying to find words for experiences she'd never spoken aloud. Dr. Williams waited patiently, asking gentle questions that helped Maya understand that what had happened to her had a name: domestic abuse, and that her reactions were normal responses to abnormal circumstances. "You're not broken," Dr. Williams had said during their third session. "You're someone who survived a dangerous situation using whatever tools you had available. Now we're going to help you develop new tools for the life you want to build." Cole never asked what they talked about during these sessions. He'd drive her down the mountain in comfortable silence, wait in the truck reading a paperback Western novel, then drive her home with the same quiet respect for her privacy. But Maya could tell he was learning too, probably from books he checked, out from the small library or websites he researched in the evenings. She noticed it in small ways. How he'd started announcing his presence before entering a room, calling out, "It's Cole," before opening doors. How he'd position himself where she could always see him, never approaching from behind or blocking her path to an exit. How he'd begun asking permission for things that most people took for granted. "Mind if I sit here?" he'd ask before joining her on the porch steps. "Is it okay if I help with that?" Before reaching for something she was struggling with. "Would you like me to stay, or would you prefer to be alone?" When she seemed overwhelmed, the consideration was touching and sometimes frustrating. Maya wanted to tell him he didn't need to treat her like she might break, but she also understood that his careful approach was helping her heal in ways she couldn't have anticipated. It was teaching her that she had choices, that her boundaries mattered, that she could say no without consequences. One evening in early June, they were sitting on the porch of the main house watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. Ruth had gone to bed early, leaving them alone with the peaceful sounds of evening settling over the ranch. Maya had been quiet all day, processing something Dr. Williams had said about trauma and healing not being linear. "Can I ask you something?" Maya said suddenly. Cole looked up from the piece of wood he'd been whittling into what might become a small horse. Course. Why are you so patient with me? With all my... She gestured vaguely, searching for words. Broken pieces? Cole was quiet for so long that Maya thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful and careful. My dad was a good man most of the time. But when he drank, which was more often than not after my mom died, he turned into someone else. Someone angry and unpredictable and quick with his fists. Cole's hand stilled on the carving. I learned early what it was like to live on eggshells, never knowing what might set him off. Maya felt her chest tighten with recognition and sympathy. My little sister Jenna, she was only 8 when Mom passed. She got the worst of it because she reminded him of Mom the most. I tried to protect her when I could, but I was just a kid myself. Cole set down the carving and looked out at the mountains. I swore when I got old enough that I'd never make anyone feel the way he made us feel. Never use my size or my strength to frighten someone who was smaller or more vulnerable. I'm sorry, Maya said softly. That's a heavy burden for a child to carry. Taught me some valuable things, though. Taught me that real strength isn't about overpowering people. It's about making them feel safe enough to be themselves. Cole turned to look at her, his eyes serious. You're not broken, Maya. You're someone who survived something terrible and came out on the other side, still capable of kindness and trust. That takes more strength than most people ever have to find. The words settled into Maya's chest like seeds finding fertile ground. For the first time, she began to think that maybe the experiences that had nearly destroyed her had also created something valuable: resilience, empathy, an appreciation for genuine kindness that people who'd never known cruelty might take for granted. As summer deepened, Maya found herself changing in ways both small and significant. She started sleeping, with the windows open again. She began taking walks by herself in the early morning, exploring the trails that wound through the forest behind the ranch. She even convinced Ruth to let her take over the bookkeeping entirely, finding satisfaction in the orderly columns of numbers and the tangible sense of contributing to the ranch's success. But the most significant change was in her relationship with Cole. The careful distance they'd maintained began to shift into something warmer, more intimate. Not physically. They still hadn't progressed beyond the occasional touch of hands or brief comforting hugs, but emotionally. They talked more openly about their pasts, their hopes, their fears. One afternoon, Cole asked if she'd like to help him work with a young horse that had been rescued from a neglectful situation. The mare was beautiful but skittish, flinching, away from human contact and responding to any sudden movement with panic. She reminds me of someone I know, Cole said with a gentle smile as they stood outside the corral watching the horse pace nervously. Smart, beautiful, stronger than she knows, but convinced that all humans are going to hurt her. Maya felt heat rise in her cheeks. Very subtle. I'm not known for my subtlety, Cole admitted. But I thought maybe you two could help each other. Working with the horse, Iris, Cole had named her, became a weekly ritual that Maya looked forward to more than she'd expected. Cole taught her how to approach without threatening, how to read the mare's body language, how to earn trust through consistency and patience rather than force. The thing about horses, Cole explained as Maya slowly extended her hand for Iris to sniff, is that they're prey animals. They're always watching for danger. If you want to build a relationship with them, you have to prove over and over that you're safe. How do you prove that? Maya asked, watching Iris's ears flicker with nervous attention. Time, consistency, never making sudden moves, never taking more than they're ready to give. Cole's voice was soft and steady, as much for the horse's benefit as for Maya's, and accepting that some days they'll trust you more than others. Healing isn't a straight line. The parallel wasn't lost on Maya. She began to understand that Cole was teaching her about more than horse training. He was showing her what healthy relationships looked like, built on mutual respect, earned trust, and the understanding that both parties had the right to set boundaries. Slowly, Iris began to accept Maya's presence. First, just standing near the fence without running away. Then allowing Maya to touch her neck briefly before moving away. Eventually, she began approaching Maya voluntarily, curious about this gentle human who never demanded more than she was ready to give. The breakthrough came on a warm July evening. Maya was sitting in the corral, not trying to interact with Iris, just being present. She'd had a difficult session with Dr. Williams that day, talking about the fear that Derek might return, the nightmares that still came sometimes, the way certain sounds or smells could transport her back to moments of terror. She was lost in her thoughts when she felt something soft against her shoulder. Iris had approached silently and was now resting her muzzle against Maya's back, offering comfort in the simple way that animals sometimes did. Tears started flowing before Maya even realized she was crying. Not tears of sadness, but of something that felt like relief, like recognition. This beautiful, damaged creature was choosing to trust her, to offer affection despite everything she'd been through. If Iris could heal enough to love again, maybe Maya could too. Cole found them like that 20 minutes later, Maya leaning against the horse's neck while Iris stood perfectly still, somehow understanding that her presence was needed. He didn't interrupt, just watched from outside the corral until Maya was ready to pull away. "She's never done that before," he said quietly as Maya wiped her eyes. A year had passed since Maya first drove up the winding mountain road to the Henderson ranch, and autumn had painted the mountains in shades of gold and crimson that took her breath away every morning. The woman who woke each day in the small cabin was barely recognizable as the frightened person who'd arrived with nothing but a duffel bag and a heart full of fear. The changes were everywhere, some obvious and others subtle. Maya's hair had grown longer, and she wore it loose now instead of pulled back severely. Her clothes fit better, the result of Ruth's insistence on proper meals and the physical work that had put healthy color in her cheeks. But the biggest changes were in her eyes. The constant alertness had been replaced by something that looked like peace. The legal battles were finally over. Derek had contested the divorce, hired lawyers, made threats, but in the end, the mountain community had rallied around Maya in ways that still amazed her. Frank from the general store had testified about Derek's drunken behavior when he'd stopped for directions. The sheriff had documented Derek's violations of the restraining order. Even Ruth's lawyer had taken Maya's case for a fraction of his usual fee because, as he'd put it, sometimes doing the right thing is more important than making money. The final papers had arrived 3 weeks ago, officially ending a marriage that Maya now understood had never been based on love at all. She'd cried when she signed them, but they were tears of relief rather than sadness. Derek had made one last attempt to assert control, showing up at the ranch in late August with legal papers of his own and a new story about wanting to reconcile. But the man who faced him this time wasn't the same broken woman he'd left behind. Maya had stood her ground, flanked by Cole and Ruth, and told Derek calmly but firmly that she was done being afraid of him. "I don't belong to you," she'd said, her voice steady and sure. "I never did. People aren't property to be owned." Derek had blustered and threatened, but something in Maya's demeanor had convinced him that his power over her was truly broken. He'd left with angry words, but they'd felt empty, like the last gasps of a storm that had blown itself out. The sheriff had been waiting at the bottom of the mountain road, having been called ahead of time. Derek's parole officer had been very interested in his cross-state travel and attempts to contact Maya despite the restraining order. Maya didn't know exactly what had happened next, but Derek's sister had called a week later to say he was in a treatment program and wouldn't be bothering Maya again. With that chapter of her life finally closed, Maya had been free to explore what came next. The answer had been more beautiful than she'd dared to imagine. Her relationship with Cole had evolved naturally, like a mountain stream finding its way to the sea. There had been no dramatic moment of declaration, no sudden rush of passion. Instead, there had been a gradual deepening of trust, understanding, and affection that felt as natural as breathing. The first time he'd kissed her had been on a September evening when they were watching the sunset from her cabin's porch. They'd been talking about Iris, who had recently allowed a small child from town to pet her, when Cole had looked at Maya with an expression of such tenderness that her breath caught. "Can I kiss you?" he'd asked, the question simple and direct, and completely respectful of her right to choose. Her answer had been a yes that came from the deepest part of her heart, and when their lips met, it felt like coming home to herself. There was nothing desperate or demanding about it, just warmth and connection and the promise of good things to come. They'd taken their time with everything. Late evening walks through the autumn forest, hands intertwined. Long conversations. On lazy Sunday afternoons, sharing dreams and fears and silly observations about ranch life. Quiet dinners where Cole would cook for her sometimes, clumsily, but with such evident care that even his burned biscuits tasted like love. Maya had learned that Cole was funny in unexpected ways, dry and observant with a talent for finding humor in everyday situations. She'd discovered that he read voraciously, especially history and biographies, and that he had strong opinions about everything from coffee preparation to the proper way to mend a fence. She'd watched him work with injured animals and difficult horses, always patient, always gentle, always willing to take as much time as healing required. And Cole had seen sides of Maya that she'd forgotten existed. Her laugh, which came more easily now and had a musical quality that made him smile every time he heard it. Her fierce protectiveness of anything vulnerable, whether it was an injured bird or one of the ranch's older horses. Her intelligence and practical wisdom, evident in the way she'd taken over much of the ranch's business management and improved systems that had been unchanged for decades. Ruth watched their relationship develop with obvious satisfaction, occasionally dropping comments about how nice it was to see the ranch full of life again, how much easier her own life had become with two capable people helping to run things, how certain she was that her late husband would have approved of the changes. That man loved this place more than anything, Ruth had said one evening as the three of them sat on the main house's porch. But he loved it because it was a good place for people to build lives together. He'd be happy to see it serving that purpose again. As autumn deepened toward winter, Maya realized that she'd stopped thinking of the ranch as a place where she was hiding and started thinking of it as home. Not just geographically, but emotionally. These mountains, these people, this life. They'd become the foundation of who she was becoming rather than just refuge from who she'd been. The realization had come during her last session with Dr. Williams. Maya had been talking about her plans for the ranch's bookkeeping system, her ideas for improving the guest cabin that Ruth was thinking about renting out to tourists, her excitement about helping Cole train 2 new horses that would arrive in the spring. "You're talking about the future," Dr. Williams had observed with a smile. 6 months ago, you could barely imagine next week. She was right. Maya had spent so many years in survival mode, focused only on getting through each day, that thinking beyond immediate needs had felt impossible. Now she found herself making plans, setting goals, imagining possibilities that stretched months and years ahead. The biggest possibility was the one she and Cole had started discussing more seriously as winter approached. Marriage. Not the kind Maya had known before, built on control and fear, but the kind that existed between equals who chose each other freely and supported each other's growth. Cole's proposal, when it came, was perfectly him, simple, sincere, and offered without pressure or expectation. It happened on a November morning when they were working together to bring the horses in from the far pasture before a winter storm arrived. Maya was watching Cole work with one of the more skittish, Mari's admiring his patience and skill, when he stopped and looked at her with unusual seriousness. "Maya," he said, "I want to ask you something, but I want you to know that there's no pressure to answer any particular way. Your friendship means everything to me, and that won't change no matter what you say." Maya felt her heart start to beat. Faster, but it was anticipation rather than fear. "I love you," Cole continued, his voice steady and sure. "I love your strength and your kindness and the way you've brought joy back to this place. I love watching you heal and grow and become more yourself every day. And I'd like to marry you, if you'd want that too. Not because you need taking care of, but because I want to build a life with you. Because I think we make each other better." The proposal wasn't a surprise. They'd talked around the idea for weeks, but hearing the words spoken aloud still made Maya's eyes fill with tears. "I love you too," she said, the words feeling both new and familiar. Yes, I want to marry you." Cole's smile was like sunrise over the mountains, bright and warm and full of promise. When he kissed her this time, surrounded by horses and mountain air and the scent of approaching snow, Maya felt complete in a way she'd never imagined possible. They'd set the date for the following spring, after the last of the snow melted and the wildflowers began to bloom in the mountain meadows. It would be a small ceremony, just Ruth and Cole's sister Jenna and a few close friends from town. Maya wanted to write her own vows, words that spoke to the journey they'd both taken to reach this moment. As winter settled over the ranch, Maya found herself looking forward to the quiet months ahead. Time to plan not just a wedding, but a life. Time to continue the healing that she now understood would be ongoing, but no longer overwhelming. Time to simply enjoy being happy. The nightmares were rare now, and when they came, she no longer faced them alone. Cole would hold her until the fear passed, offering comfort without trying to fix what couldn't be quickly healed. He'd learned, as she had, that love wasn't about erasing the past but about creating a present strong enough to hold it without being defined by it. One evening in early December, as snow fell softly outside the windows of her cabin, Maya sat by the fire working on a letter to Dr. Williams. She wrote about the wedding plans, about her growing confidence in her own strength, about the way love felt when it was offered freely rather than demanded as payment. "I used to think that my experiences had broken something in me that could never be fixed," she wrote.